are. Let's talk about this first one. The SEC championship, 22-19 in overtime. That's 9 overtimes that Georgia's now played in the last 2 weeks, but now they're going to get 4 weeks off. That's really the most important thing. But Georgia wins an SEC championship over Texas. And I have on the bottom right here, it says, and if you're listening on podcast, unfortunately you can't read it, but I'll tell you anyway. Georgia tops Texas in SEC championship, but at what cost? Yeah, because Carson Beck is going to be on the shelf here for the foreseeable future. Based off of what I've been hearing in these reports, it could be a UCL injury, which if you are a baseball fan, that means Tommy John surgery. Not good. Really not good for the Georgia Bulldogs. But what is good is the fact that Gunnar Stockton comes into this game in the second half, and he gives them a spark. They score 13 points in the second half of this game. And then, of course, you have the 6 in overtime. So, look, I don't know what the future holds for Gunnar Stockton as the starting quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs, but that's really where the conversation needs to start. That and the fact that the Georgia Bulldogs continue to not really play good football until the second half. It's been a worrisome trend for the Dogs here over the course of, the entire season, really. I think the number was 13 points per game on average in the first half. But the biggest thing is that they hold Texas out of the end zone. They only account for 6 points. This game was 6-3 going in at the half. And it felt like Texas was really in firm control of this game, especially given the fact that Carson Beck was injured at halftime, the last play before halftime. It was not looking good for the Dogs, but the defense continues to play at an elite level. They harassed Quinn Ewers, and I was very surprised that we didn't end up seeing any Arch Manning at all in this game because Quinn Ewers just didn't look super good at times, but he does end up with 358 yards and a touchdown. But that was really the only part of that offense that was working. The rushing attack dominated once more, if you account for sack yardage, 31 total yards on the ground. That is the reason they lost this game, because you flip flip to the other side, and it's the Georgia Bulldogs and Trevor Etienne. He goes for 94 yards and 2 tutties. This team is a lot better when Trevor Etienne is cooking. His 2 best games of the season come against Texas both times. So the last time they were in Austin, and then this time when they were in Atlanta. But Arian Smith, he leads the team in receiving. Wasn't really that kind of game, though. It was what they did on defense and what they did on the ground. They held them out of the end zone, and then look, Auburn misses 2 field goals that end up being a backbreaker for the Longhorns in this game. But credit to Kirby Smart. After everything that they've been through this season, for them to come out on top and win an SEC title is just almost storybook, the way that this season's gone for them.
Yeah, I mean, look, with respect to what Carson Beck did in the first meeting, this matchup and the way this thing played out was very similar. It was about the Georgia run game. It was about the Georgia defense pressuring the quarterback, and it was also about the Georgia defense limiting the Texas run game. All of those things happened once again in this game, and the Georgia offense didn't quite explode the way it did. They didn't necessarily get turnovers in the way that they did. But you mentioned it, and you and I were dead on, and we both agreed. If Travian Wisner doesn't get going in this game, it was just always going to be tough. In Texas, they got to be kicking themselves because they had opportunities to bury Georgia early on, and they didn't do it. And it was one of those things, and I sent out a tweet, and I don't remember the specifics, but it was certainly around the idea of like, man, you had an opportunity to put this team down. You didn't do it. And how many times this year have we seen Georgia come out as a different squad in the second half? Quite literally a different squad this time because it was Gunnar Stockton and not Carson Beck. Mm-hmm. But just in general. And the other thing that we saw in the first game, right, where Georgia goes into Austin and wins 30-15, you see it again, 22-19. The return of Trevor Etienne was huge for the Georgia offense. There were questions about his ribs, questions about how much he would play. There's been questions all season, quite frankly, about how good he's been. And look, he was under 100 yards, but 2 touchdowns in this one. He led the team in rushing, second leading receiver. Just a huge game for a team that was desperate to find some offense, especially in the second half after Gunnar Stockton came in, and Gunnar was red hot on the first drive, and they tested him. Then they kind of closed the offense up. I don't know why, but late in this game, Trevor Etienne took it under himself to find the game winner in overtime, but also carry through. And just very impressive for Georgia again to be able to do what they did. Again, the defense was a terror. 6 sacks again, and we talked about it. What is Texas going to do to adjust? Surely Georgia can't impact the quarterback again, can they? Yes, apparently they can. And look, it led to 2 interceptions. It also led to a lost fumble. So Georgia does get 3 turnovers forced, and they go from there. It was just one of those things, Garrett, where you watch this game and you're like, yeah, I think I could see Georgia winning the national championship, and that's not new. Like we didn't. It's not something we didn't know. But I think you could see that. And quite frankly, I was impressed with Texas. I think there were opportunities again to have put this game away. But to battle back and deal with what they dealt with and take Georgia to the brink, very impressive showing, albeit in a losing effort. But Georgia gets the win. Georgia gets the bye. Georgia gets much needed time off, which you and I will talk about as well, because if the injuries are true, they've got to get Gunnar Stockton ready, and that extra week, that extra week is going to be absolutely massive, absolutely huge in getting him prepared. So it was very important, even more so than we knew at the time, that they got the bye, have extra time to prepare, because they might be doing it with a quarterback that is not as experienced as you would like.
Yeah, and look, you talk a little bit about this defense specifically. I mentioned it. You mentioned it. 15 TFLs in a game is nuts. 15 TFLs against UMass would be nuts. That's a good number for that, much less doing it in an SEC title game against Texas. Look, this is a game that when we were coming into this game, I remember we sat here on this podcast. We talked about it on Saturday morning on College Football Game Time on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Look, I said specifically, it's like, you need to be able to make that first tackle if you are Kirby Smart in this defense, right? That's where Georgia was able to cause some problems. And Georgia, they'd struggled with that in recent weeks against Georgia Tech, against UMass specifically. They had and then at various points throughout the season, they weren't tackling super well. And it's just in the 2 times that they played Texas, they were. And it's where that first guy makes the tackle. And that's why you have so many TFLs. I mean, because that's what Sark's offense kind of relies a lot on, is slipping that one guy into coverage, and then he gets a one-on-one situation, and then he slips a tackle, and then all of a sudden he's housing it. And you saw Texas had an opportunity. They had one of those plays on that 41-yard touchdown pass in the second half. That's at that moment when they tied it up at 13. They slip into space, and that you have those one-on-one matchups. It's just the problem was for this offense. For Texas's offense, is that they couldn't consistently get wins on those plays. Georgia was winning those one-on-ones too often. Georgia was dominating that, and then but that's where I get back into this. It's like they needed to run the ball better. They had to run the ball better if they wanted to have a chance in this game. I mean, we talked about how they were 1.1 yards per carry the first time that these two teams saw each other, and then on Saturday it really wasn't much better. And that's where I thought we were going to see Arch Manning. I was a little surprised that we didn't see any packages or anything like that to kind of pull him in. I'm not saying that Quinn Ewers should have been benched or anything like that, but I am saying that you needed a spark on offense. You needed to cause some stress for the Georgia Bulldogs at some level, and they weren't really stressing them in the rushing attack. They had a couple of chunk plays at times, specifically in the passing game, but outside of that, this Georgia defense just locked down. And the story is going to stay Gunnar Stockton. People are going to talk about Gunnar Stockton and the way that he was able to not have the moment be too big for him. And he stepped in and had a great performance in this game. And look, credit to him. He deserves a lot of credit in this. But it's really the Georgia defense. And if the Georgia defense plays like that, I think they should be the favorite to win the national championship, period. If they play like they did against Texas, if they play the way they did, like they did against Clemson earlier in the season, if they play the way they did against Tennessee in the second half, that team is unbeatable by anybody else in college football. Oregon, I could give that a potential. That would be a really good football game. The number 1 and number 2 team in America, but they may not even see each other in a national championship game. We'll talk about that when we get into our college football playoff bracket reveal. But this was a great game. They go into overtime. And I had so much fun watching this game. I was at a wedding, full disclosure to everybody, and bless my friends. I love them very much, but I'm sitting over there in the corner hiding behind a Christmas tree trying to follow this game and watch everything. And I was that guy at the wedding, and I am completely and totally unashamed about it. But Texas Longhorns still, they have a great season. They're still in the college football playoff, but we'll discuss that here in just a little bit. Abe, any more thoughts on this one?
No, I just think it was an outstanding SEC title game, and I guess I want to ask you something. You mentioned. I hope you don't mind me bringing this.
No, what you got?
Bringing this up. It was something you had said off air. I didn't know if you wanted to avoid the discussion, but I think you had said you weren't really sure about the atmosphere, the environment. Did it have the feel of a big game that, say, Alabama and Georgia in previous years in the SEC title game felt? As this game got going, and I know you were limited in how you were able to view it, did it start to feel that way for you? Did it feel like a big-time matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it was, because it is a big-time matchup between two really good football teams, and that's always going to carry some weight. And when I said that, I was more referencing, the stakes are so massive when Alabama and Georgia would play each other, or when Georgia played Auburn back in 2017, where you have two teams who have an opportunity to make a play for a college football playoff. And that's what it's been for such a long time, where the winner of that game is going to go to the CFP and the loser likely is not. In some cases, they did.
Let me address that. Let me address that, because I agree with you. The stakes are slightly different, but it didn't feel like Texas had the mindset of, oh, well, we're still in it.
No.
Winning the SEC title this was a brutal defeat emotionally and mentally for this Texas team, and that's also the challenge that they're going to have, and SMU is going to have, and Penn State, like the teams that lost their conference title game and are still in the playoffs. They have got to deal with the mental aspect of this, because they've got to get going again too. They don't have the week off. Now they do have a week off, but the extra week off.
What you mean.
And so they're going to have to deal with coming off of tough losses, mental letdowns, and get ramped back up. The good news is for those teams, Texas and Penn State, at least, not SMU, they will be at home. That'll give them a benefit.
Yeah. I think ultimately this is the SEC championship. This is the conference that means more. That's what they say. It's the moniker of the conference. And I think it's clear that whenever the SEC championship is played, people from everywhere else in the country turn and watch, because the game means so much. It always does. And I think that is never going to be lost. Hopefully, I hope and pray that its significance is never lost. And I was worried that it was heading into this game, where you have head coaches in the conference who had never won an SEC title, mind you, coming out and say how they don't want to play in the game. That's where I started getting a little concerned about the importance of this game and the atmosphere of this game and everything else. And then you see the ticket sales. I don't know what they ended up being, but I know that it wasn't exactly a full house. It didn't look like it wasn't a normal SEC title game in that sense, where everybody shells out $750+, which is a ludicrous sum of money to go watch a football game. But tickets had dropped to, like $90, $100 or something like that by the time the ball was kicked off. That's not normal for an SEC championship game. Generally speaking, that's go way up. So in that instance, in that sense, I do think it was lessened, and I do think that the stakes were lower. But at the end of the day, though, it is still a crippling loss for Texas. It's still a loss that's going to hurt a lot, especially if they end up seeing each other for a second time in the college football playoff. I wonder if they're going to be able to get up off the mat to beat them, because once you've beaten a team twice, it looks like Georgia kind of snatched their soul at times. But I mean, Texas kept fighting. They stayed in this game. Credit to Sark. He had a good game. He had a fine game plan. It's just, I think that a couple of things could have gone their way, but you can't get penalized like that. You can't turn the ball over like that, and you can't let your quarterback get hit like that and expect to win a lot of football games. But